Join us today on Beyond the Lair for a conversation with Sheila North. Sheila is a political icon. She's a journalist, a filmmaker, and author of her own biography, My Privilege, My Responsibility, and her new favorite role as Cookum. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Lair. I'm your co-host, Gina Jackson. I'd like to introduce my other co-host.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dean Montgomery, and it's great to see you, Sheila.
Our esteemed guest today, and we're so excited to have this powerhouse with us today, is Sheila North. Sheila North is a member of the Bunibonibee Cree Nation, also known as Oxford House. She is the former Grand Chief of Manitoba, MKO, and former Chief Communications Officer for the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. She ran for the position of National Chief of Assembly of First Nations in 2018 on a platform of reforms. Sheila is a former CTV journalist and documentarist and was nominated for a Gemini Award as CBC journalist. As a filmmaker, Sheila released a documentary 1200 plus about missing and murdered Indigenous women, MMIW, featured on CTV in 2019. And as a Cree host, she has been voicing episodes of Taken, a series about murdered and missing women for APTN and CBC. Welcome to the show. Really great.
Thank you. I'm very honored to have you host me.
Very nice. We are such big fans, and I know that we have been friends for a very long time. Dean introduced you and I, and so honored to know you. And want to talk about, with all of our guests, that we've had some really esteemed guests today, including Chastity Davis and Clint Davis, and also the great Susanna Pierce. And coming up to Indigenous Month, really wanting to talk to Indigenous leaders that are making a social impact and a difference and really taking initiatives with their power and their voice. And just wanted to start off by how you grew up, what your childhood was like, and what brought you to a place of, number one, politics, number two, a leader, a great leader, and also someone that campaigns for the rights of others.
Sure. That's a nice load of questions. And I definitely want to say also thank you for doing this. This is really empowering to see such a powerhouse from the West highlighting the importance of Indigenous people and Indigenous Month. So I'm thankful to be here, especially after you name all of those esteemed guests there. I'm humbled to be here with you. I'm thankful. As you said, I'm from Bunibonibee Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, and that's 500 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg, if you can imagine that on the map. It's not quite as far as Churchill, but we're near the underneath Gillam that way. So that's where I grew up, in my isolated community. You can still only just fly there. You can't drive there. You go in the wintertime, though. If you want to drive there, you can go on the winter roads. But yeah, it's still isolated, and the population has grown some since I grew up there, but very much still pristine in a lot of ways, still a lot of beautiful, clean water, not to that much industry there, beautiful waters. I grew up there with my parents and a bunch of siblings. There's 5 of us, and then a 6th one after a while. My parents adopted my brother. So there were 6 of us, and I would have to say I had a very sheltered childhood and upbringing. We were never allowed to run around. We were never allowed to miss school, so we were very disciplined at home. I was one of the best students, I would say, in our school all the time because my parents were very strict with us. So I was always a really good student. I started to take a lot of pride in school. So I only say that because when I moved as a teenager to Winnipeg, I was one of the smartest kids in class to being one of the dumbest kids in class because of the level of education that was available on reserve and still is to the urban centers. So I grew up there, and then I moved as a teenager to Winnipeg and started high school. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I've always dreamed about being a journalist. But I never really actually thought I would do it, but I wanted to pursue it. And so I did. I took some twists and turns and had my two children first. Ended up in some situations that were difficult as a young mom and married to a lovely man that that posed a lot of challenges. But that the hardships were also taught me a lot of strength and resilience. So from there, I pursuing journalism strongly. And in my late 20s, I finally got into journalism, started at CBC, and told a lot of stories of our people. And I didn't intend to only tell stories about our people, but that's where I ended up. And after years of reporting on MMIW, on homelessness, on other hardships, and some victories, I was pulled into work with the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs as a communications person for the Grand Chief at the time. And this was just when Idle No More was starting. And so I moved over there working with him and the organization. And organically, I became part of the group that strategized for that movement at that time. So it was a powerful time. And it got so powerful, though, that right after, the main movements that happened, the main public events, there was a sweeping cuts of organizations across Canada with the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and that impacted where I worked as well. We got 80% funding cuts at that time. So I had to figure out what I wanted to do, stay and make no money, or go back to journalism, which is what I did. So I went back to journalism at CTV. But while I was there, I was asked to run myself as a Grand Chief, and that was in 2015. So that's what I did. Eventually, it wasn't automatic. I had to think about it for a while. And then I became Grand Chief, the first female Grand Chief in Northern Manitoba. I was still a female Grand Chief from the Northern Manitoba region. And then I kept getting pulled back into politics by a lot of credible and incredible people. I never went in on my own, but it was at the request of people that I admired and that I respected. So I had because I felt like I had a lot of privileges as a child growing up and managing to survive all the craziness that happened when I was a teenager and as a young mom. So I felt very privileged, and that's why I wanted to give back in some way to our community. And so that led me to running. And so that basically is in a nutshell.
As a female in that time and being asked to do that, and there's very few female Indigenous leaders, at that level. What was that like in not having a ton of experience getting into that?
Yeah, at first it was definitely overwhelming. I was in large boardrooms many times with only men, and sometimes not even our own Indigenous men or Indigenous people. So that was also very different. And maybe it was just in my head, but it was like the room was vibrating with so much energy. And so I had to learn to find the strength inside to start speaking up and talking about the issues that were impacting our people. And so, I felt alone sometimes, but I also felt a lot of strength from more wise people than I am, and a lot of guidance. And I also had to follow my instincts as well, because I grew up around great people like the late Elijah Harper. And I knew of stories and interactions with, former National Chief Phil Fontaine, for example, because my dad was one of the leaders that was part of that caliber. So I was used to seeing high, powerful people around and hearing about them. And so, but it was strange because some women leaders, counselors mostly, and some chiefs, I started to learn more about their struggles, and some of the things that they were telling me were they didn't feel part of the circle when big important events were happening. They weren't necessarily feeling included, but things were starting to change because of positions that I was holding, and not only me, but others across Canada. So I saw a slow change even in the short time that I was there.
I think it's the pressure of being in that level of the political field, but also the immeasurable pressure it is to be the best at your job you can possibly be, because you're the first female Grand Chief at that level, and there's so many eyes watching you. And unfortunately, with human nature, people are looking at not necessarily your successes at all time, and being in the political field at that level, it's not an initial individual decision for what goes on and impacts the people. How did you balance that to be able to be a mother, to be a political leader, to have all eyes watching you? Because being the first of the first produces a lot of pressure on you.
Mm-hmm. I would say I was a little bit naive even of the pressures and the amount of work that it took to do that position. I tried my best to balance my home and work life. I of course, you think back and think you could have done better. I would say also I have a really strong still family connection with my siblings and my parents. My father was still alive at the time. So I relied a lot on them to keep me grounded and to keep me feeling safe and happy, even though there was a lot of other struggles around. So I never took them necessarily. And I tried my best to keep encouraging my own kids, because I feel like if you can't keep your own family and your own kids encouraged and happy and moving along, then it's harder for you to do that for other families and other communities. So I had to keep that in mind. But, heart suffered. My relationship with my husband at the time, it disintegrated because I didn't have a lot of time to keep, that spark alive, I suppose. So that went away. And so lots of personal hardships, I suppose, sacrifices that had a lot of impact afterwards. But yeah, overall, I would say that I think it is what it is. It happened the way it is, and I'm glad for the opportunity. And the pressure was great, but I'm glad I'm here now to tell the tale because I stood on shoulders of many strong people, including leaders in other capacities, not just politically, but at home and community leaders. So I felt a lot of strength from them, encouragement. And I also kept, at a distance, anyone that was really super negative. I didn't try to dismiss them or even disrespect them, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time engaging people that were negative in any way. And so sounds easy now, but it was pretty hard at the time.
I bet. During that time, I think we'd met roughly around that time, probably 2014,
yes,
15
was,
or something like that. And you were working with our very good friend, Brad Mason, and Judy Lynn Mason. And that was through one of the many causes that you support in so many ways. You give up your time so generously. So if we could talk a little bit about, maybe about your movie, something, any of the organizations you're working with, and of course, give a little shout out to Live Different, which has done such great work.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. That was the time that we met. You all came to my first ever AGA as the Grand Chief. And so you and Brad and Chris McLeod, you all came up to my first AGA and you all did presentations. And I remember very clearly the reaction from chiefs at the time saying, we need to hear more of these kind of opportunities and more of these kind of messaging, because it seemed like it was lacking, and what you all brought was hope and ingenuity and inspiration. And so I was very grateful for that time. And I was glad I was introduced to Live Different, because I also had a huge responsibility on my shoulder from the leadership saying, we need help with our young people. We need to inspire them. We need to do more with them, because they knew that young people were always the ones that were the first to be cut out of programming because of the tremendous pressure communities have on the basics that they need for their community. So young people and young people programming kind of fell by the wayside a lot of times, not because they wanted to, but that's how it happened. So they wanted organizations and people to bring some hope and inspiration to young people. So Live Different was introduced to me by you and Brad and Judy Lynn, as well as Chris and Charles Roberts, and I saw the value. So then I introduced to the Chiefs, who then saw the need and the synergies as well. So they welcomed Live Different to our communities, and that's when Live Different started doing a lot of Indigenous programming on First Nations across Canada. So we were the first, I believe, to start hosting the Indigenous road teams out of Live Different. And so after I was done my term, they asked me to be a board member of Live Different, and I'm still a board member there. And actually on June 1st, I'll be leading a team of 3 northern groups to the Dominican Republic to do a house build for a week. So I'm really looking forward to that. And that's one of the places that I'm a volunteer board member of. And I'm honored to be asked to be on these important boards. And that's one of the things I spend my time with these days, is on these boards that help young people and help vulnerable people in different ways. And I'm happy to support organizations that do the work that they do and the work that you all do as well. As far as my film, 1200 Plus, I worked on it while I was still Grand Chief with my film partner and friend, Leonard Yakir, who lives in Massachusetts, but he's from Winnipeg. But he and I met literally on a bridge when we were both covering the aftermath of what happened to the late Tina Fontaine here in Winnipeg. And I was still working at CTV at the time, and he's a filmmaker taking pictures. And so we met and we talked about an idea to do a film on missing and murdered. And we started collaborating, and without even having a plan, we started filming, we started gathering interviews and gathering information on what we should include about the history of the issue. And so we got together, and it took us 4 years to finalize the shooting of the film, writing it and editing it. And it's a 90-minute documentary. We have it in different formats as well, including 30 minutes or 10 minutes or trailers. But I was never really able to promote it because of the work that I was doing and the high profile positions that I was holding, because of the ethical reasons. I had to, let it do its own promotion. But, I know that more could have been done to promote, but now I'm able to promote it a little bit more, and it's being housed at Winnipeg Film Group. It's available to organizations, groups, and they can rent it. And we also got a curriculum created out of it based on the film. So we have a university-based curriculum that can also be pared down to smaller groups as well. So I'm just starting to work with Winnipeg Film Group and others to promote it and get it into the hands and the psyche of the rest of Canada, to help them understand what the issues are, why we keep seeing these things, and what some of the root causes are, and some of the history of the issue that persists today. And I also, was asked to write a memoir of some of my experiences in doing some of these things that I was talking about. And so I touched a little bit on MMIW as well in my memoir.
So much. I believe that the universe, that timing is everything. And being the Grand Chief is such an amazing platform, but I believe the experience and credibility that you get from that has moved you to a place where you can really promote something that's much greater, that will affect so many people on a national and international level. And congratulations on that. I would love to find out, if people want to find out how they can watch this film, how they can purchase it, rent it, what have you, how do they do that?
They can go to the website, winnipegfilmgroup.com, I believe, or .org. But yeah, it's very easy to find. If you type those two, 1200 Plus and Winnipeg Film Group, it'll get you to where you need to go. And they make it very easy for people to rent to groups or to individuals. And you have the opportunity to also look at the curriculum and consider that. I know that there's a lot of interest for companies and organizations to educate their people. So it's a good opportunity to do that from this, because it covers a lot of the history of Canada and how we came to be where we're at and some of the disparities that we see. So it touches on a lot, but from the lens of the vulnerability and the impact it has had on Indigenous women and girls and two-spirit and transgendered folks.
What do you think that the target audience for something, if I was an instructor, whether I be an elementary school teacher or a high school teacher or a college or university professor, what would be the age appropriate target market for some? Because I think it's really important for kids nowadays to be educated. Obviously, I'm in my 50s, and we were never taught about residential schools. In fact, our history was all about American history, or it was about Canadian, very high level Canadian history. We never learned anything. And I think if we did, then if you're educated about it, then you have to take ownership of it. And if you take ownership of it, then you have to have compensation for the people that you've affected and the genocide that happened. So today, our kids are 12 and 13 years old, and it's openly taught in school. They have Orange Shirt Day. They talk about the missing, murdered women and girls. And when do you think is an appropriate time for people to be educated about platforms like this? Because Orange Shirt Day is one thing, but the atrocities for missing, murdered women and girls is another.
Yeah, I think we should start learning the history at all levels, including young, kindergarten and nursery. My little grandson, who's almost 4 now, when he comes over, I did a talk with some elementary school students like this on my computer, and I was in my other room, and there was a drum behind me. And I was talking to the kids, and my little grandson was running. And while I was talking, he got up and climbed over me and grabbed the drum and started banging it, which would normally be, a funny moment, I suppose, if you're in a serious environment. But it was great for the kids. And then it dawned on me that at that moment that, when I was growing up, I grew up in church, and I'm thankful for that. But I never was ever allowed to see anything like that in my home, let alone in my school. I never saw the drum. I never saw, anything remotely from my culture as a spirituality source, or a spirituality element. And so everything to me was taught not just by my parents, but society, that anything, even like that jacket behind me, that's my late father's jacket. He would have never had that when we were going. He got that years later. But, we weren't even allowed to have nice beadwork or anything like that, because we were taught that it was taboo. So I think nowadays our children are learning differently, but we need to start teaching our young people the harshness sometimes of what they need to look out for, especially young people that don't grow up in our urban centers. We need to arm them with a lot of information so they can understand the pitfalls that they may face in life. And I wish I had that when I was transitioning from my community to urban center as a teen, because I was definitely way in over my head. But I never told my parents, because I didn't want to fail. But a lot of people have fallen through the cracks and failed because of the perils of things. So yeah, I believe we need to teach it at all levels, the good and the bad. And everyone needs to, not just Indigenous people, non-Indigenous people. I often quote Murray Sinclair, and we all know who Murray Sinclair is. And he talks about how when he was young, he was taught from early ages all the way to grade school and high school and law school. He also said he was always one of the smartest kids in class, but he was treated like one of the worst and dumbest kids in class. He said the dumbest white guy always got better treatment than I did. And he says that's what we were taught as a society, that it's okay to push back the little Native kids. You don't need to give them any respect. You don't need to give them any equal, respect or levity. And so he says we learned all of that all together as a society. So going off all these years, and then in graduation and university, post-secondary, you still hold on to those beliefs because that's what we were all taught. And so eventually everyone starts going into their careers. So they take that on with them into, their jobs as judges and lawyers and reporters and doctors and grocery store clerks, whatever. And so we're in a big mess because of that. And I think it's going to take future generations like my grandson and your children to start to change the tide and change the narrative about Indigenous people in our country. But it has to happen. It started already. So we won't see any big changes, I think. Maybe when we're creaky in our rocking chairs, we'll start to see the big changes.
Yeah. It's so true that, and I think, we know that the solution to any reconciliation between Canada and Indigenous people is education, right? It's so powerful. And, we do the youth camps. It's really important. And, today, Gina and I were, our whole teams were working with communities that are Indigenous and occasionally in non-Indigenous communities. And the disparity in literacy is huge. It still is today. This is even a couple of weeks ago. So what as a politician, how would you suggest that we change this? And as a mom and as just a great human being that you are, what would you suggest that we need to do?
Well, we need definitely more funding for the education system, especially on reserves, and access to it. When I was the smartest kids in class at home to the dumbest kid in class, I was so devastated by that because I took a lot of pride in being a good student. Like I was used to having 90%, 100% on everything. I have one of my report cards actually that time. I couldn't understand what the heck we were talking about, and algebra and essay writing. And so I got tested by a guidance counselor, and I tested at a grade 8 level. So I wasn't able to keep up. So imagine that happening over and over again. And even if you graduate on reserve and come to urban center and go to post-secondary, you still have to deal with the culture shock and the transition experience as well. And on top of that, you have struggles in the education system because you weren't offered the same amount. So I always say that, we can't expect people to be successful if we're not giving them the right type of resources that they need. We need to close that divide and start to offer the education that our young people deserve and our families deserve on reserves, that we have the proper books, the proper compensation for good teachers to keep them interested in our communities, because that's part of the problem, as you probably know, is there's high turnover rates for teachers across our country in Northern and First Nations, because, the Southern First Nations pay more and they have more access to modern amenities. So you have to find dedicated and special people to stay on reserves. Many things could be done in the system because it hasn't happened, and I know for a fact that we're still at least 2 grades behind, and we need to change that if we hope to have a better future and empower our population that is the fastest growing population in our communities and our young people.
Mm-hmm.
That's an excellent answer. Can you tell us a little bit about what you love to do the most? I know that you're a CTV journalist, you're a filmmaker, a political icon, you're an advocate for rights for murdered, missing Indigenous women and girls. You've support entrepreneurism, you support youth and education. What is it what is it that you love to do the most, or where you see yourself going and being an advocate in the future?
My new part of my life that I'm honestly saying it's been my favorite role so far that I've had is being a cookum, first of all.
Grandma.
My daughter, I had my daughter very young, and now she's in my life right now, and I hope to have more, but I think I might not have any more. Hopefully. But anyway, it really changed my perspective, and it really made me think about what our ancestors and our grandparents must have thought of when they were, facing the things that they faced and the time that they lived in. And, treaty making time, it reminds me of what they must have thought, because as a parent, I felt like when I look back, I did my best, but I felt like I was always in survival mode, trying to support my children and to support myself. It was always a struggle. It wasn't always easy. But as a cookum now, that responsibility is mostly on my daughter, and I support her as much as but now with my relationship with him, I feel like I can look into the future more, and I can imagine a better place for him to grow up in, and trying to remove some of the obstacles that we all face growing up. And so it gives me a new perspective on the future and being hopeful, even though right now it feels like we have still a lot of struggles, and we do. But I also have a lot of great hope, and I can see further to make sure that at least the influence that I have on him, and then reminds me of what it must be like for everyone else. And I hope that they feel the same, that we still have a lot of work to do as in our later stages in life to make sure young people have access to things that we didn't have access to. So that's one of the things I really like to do these days and that's why I stay on some of these boards, because I want to impact the future. And I don't know why I get a kick out of bridging divides of different opinions. I like doing that through journalism, but also in the political work that I did. That was one of my things that I really liked. When I look back in retrospect, I liked bringing people on two different sides of a topic and trying to find common ground. And so I use it when I'm asked. And so I get asked for my opinions in the media, but also in conferences and schools. I have lots of high school students that reach out to me almost every day asking me for, information on MMIW or information on leadership. I was talking to a high school student in Seattle, Washington just the other day, and then just the other morning a Northern Manitoba youth. And so I like doing that. I like spending time, looking into the future, hoping that at least I can leave a path of hope. And that's what I like to do.
I love that.
Aside from traveling, I love traveling too. That's one of my favorite things to do.
It's really great that you can spend time and take the time for people that do reach out to you to be able to give your mentorship. And I know the one resource that we have so limited and lack of capacity is time. And to be able to be approachable and be such a great leader and such an icon and be able to have people reach out to you and just ask for that kind of advice is so admirable.
Thank you.
No, it is. And what do you think about journalism? What are you still interested in journalism and media, and what, if so, what type of, you've covered all, you've been an anchor, you've been a writer, you've been a filmmaker, where do you see yourself going that way?
Well, I definitely am still interested in the field of journalism, because it's something that I want my whole life. And I would even say it was so important to me that it kept me alive. The dream to become a journalist kept me alive many times throughout my journey. And when I finally reached my lifelong goal to be a host, specifically on CBC, it was a late night show, and I was sitting in the studio by myself. And the first time that I ever did it on my own after being trained, it was like explosions in my head happening in my heart, because I realized I was finally achieving the dream that I had since I was a very young girl, because CBC was the only program and TV channel that we had growing up on reserve. And the people on TV became my role models. And my mom would encourage me to write to them because I was always watching the news with my dad. So I reached out, and I always dreamed of being a journalist, but I definitely fall back to that when I think about what I really want to do and help tell stories about our people and share different perspectives. So without saying a lot, I'm hoping to get back into journalism in some form. And I just had a different conversation about that just earlier today. So stay tuned for that. But I'm excited.
Oh, it's so great. And yeah, you've accomplished everything and more that you've ever thought of, I'm sure. It's funny too, Gina always she has a great story that, her dream was to get into broadcast journalism when she was, 20, 18.
Oh, yeah.
And she did, but maybe go on.
Yeah, you know what? I wanted to get into broadcast journalism, and I went to BCIT, got my broadcast journalism degree, and then part of it was going to getting my internship. So I went to Los Angeles to get my internship, and I was full of bravado because I grew up in a very tumultuous childhood, and I just thought the only way that I can show success is on this grand level of being a reporter. And I either wanted to go into sports, which was kind of the flavor, and we're going back 30 years ago. So just the beginning of female sports reporters getting some recognition, but also just wanted to be part of tabloid journalism. And I thought, Costco, go big or go home. So bragged to everybody that I was going to LA and I'm going to be this famous reporter there. And I get there after bragging to everybody, and I show up, and they greet me at the gate, and they said, no, you're not even on the list. So I go into hard copy. I think you remember that show. It's kind of tabloid journalism. And Entertainment Tonight was there as well and said, hi, my name's Jean. I'm here for my 6-month internship. And they said, sorry, the girl that arranged this doesn't work here anymore. So too bad. Oh. And I was just like, oh my God, I will. And because I had bragged it up so much, because I thought this is the ultimate success for me, I said, I don't care if I get down on my knees and scrub grout with a toothbrush. I need to be here, and I need to live up and do whatever I need to be, which is a great lesson in humility for me. Did the internship, did get some opportunities to go on a site and get to know somewhat of the industry, which the American industry, as you know, is very different than the Canadian industry. It's so much nicer in Canada. Yeah. But coming back, I never did pursue. I did a little bit in Toronto, but nothing. And it's not a big money maker here. It wasn't at the time 30 years ago, for sure. I did in Toronto, fire engine, ambulance journalism, where you had a pager. I don't know, for my listeners, the listeners can remember those days when we had pagers, when it'd be 911, you have to go to this site and interview this person, and, getting into an accident or covering that this highway is closed or what have you. But it just wasn't enough meat for me or enough money. And then circled back, ended up coming back to Vancouver, working for the Squamish Nation for 13 years, understanding the barriers for entrepreneurism. That was my first portfolio. And then circling back 30 years later, and with APTN, with having a show and looking for sponsors for the show, having the credibility of working with over 800 entrepreneurs now, and then blowing off my broadcast journalism degree so I could have this perfect package. But it came round table, and I'm doing it now for the right reason. I think if success came early for me in any way, shape, or form when I was 20, it would have been for the wrong reasons. And just going to journalism now for the right reasons, and being able to be an Indigenous leader like yourself, to have the credibility of your business acumen, you're authentic, you're a grandmother, a cookum, you've got children, you support all these different initiatives. You're the full package. So when I'm watching you on TV, you're not just a pretty face that is put on a program because it's an Indigenous piece that's missing, or tokenism it's you're the real deal. So is Donna Sound. All of these beautiful human beings that we watch every night, like you said, that we trust when we turn on our TV. that you're there reporting for the right reason. And I just have so much respect for that.
Well, I'm glad that you took that journey because you're here, and we wouldn't have met you if you stayed in Hollywood and probably married a superstar down there. Then we would have lost you. But now you're here, stuck with us, so I'm glad for that. But yeah, you're right. It's been it's an incredible journey, and Creator knows better what our future is and our plans are. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to intersect with the both of you on this part of the journey. Awesome.
Well, we look forward to seeing you soon, we hope. And you are just, one of our favorite people. And thank you so much for coming on today.
And we can't wait to see any kind of announcements getting back into journalism. Hopefully we'll be one of the first people that you tag. And I love all your social media. And how can people learn more, like you mentioned, about your film, or just about you, Sheila? And I know that you mentioned that there's people youth particularly, that contact you, whether it's on social media or LinkedIn, or to follow you. How do people get to be a bigger piece and to follow your life and your journeys?
Yeah, they can definitely find me on Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. I don't know. I think there was only one fake account at one point, but I don't even know if it exists anymore. So I'm easy to find. You can also look up my book. You have to be good at self-promotion these days. I wasn't good at it, but there we go.
Please, what a gorgeous picture. Hold that up. Hold that up. Yes, my privilege. Beautiful. Congratulations. And an author.
And I think if people want to know what it's like growing up on reserve, as an Indigenous person, and some of the struggles and some of the successes, I would say get the book and others like it. My shelf is also filled with other biographies and other books. And I think that's one of the easiest ways to find out what it's like for other people, so that we can all be good global citizens to each other. And so, that's one of the ways that people can learn about my journey. And I hope that inspires people to also keep going on what they're supposed to do in life. And I do feel privileged and honored to be with the both of you today.
Oh, thank you, Sheila. And how can people find your book?
You can you can Google it. Amazon has, of course, copies. My publisher is Great Plains Publishing here out of Winnipeg. So that's always the best way, or the most supportive way, I believe, is to go through the smaller bookstores and book chains and the publisher itself to order books. Amazon, of course, is great as well, but and libraries apparently have it too, so you can check there as well. And they could probably order it if they don't have it.
Oh, congratulations on just another accomplishment. Wow.
Thank you. And it's not a tough read. It's like, it's not academic. So I even found a couple of mistakes even after 5 edits. I'm like, God. But anyway.
It's an amazing accomplishment, and you are so a well-rounded individual, and such an honor to be with you today. And we hope to see you very, very soon.
Me too. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Lair. Please follow us, download this episode, and follow us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok.